Well, first of all, thank you very much. It is an immense pleasure to host this particular panel, because this is a panel that is quite ambitious, and I'm humbled by the expertise that is assembled here. These are public figures, academics and scholars that I do follow myself, to educate myself on some of the most important trends. And this panel is called The Wonderful World of Disinformation, which is a very broad topic. And we do have distinguished speakers. On my right side is Dr. Jessica Dawson, an Academy professor at the United States Military Academy at West Point. She holds a PhD in sociology from Duke University, and her research interests include extremism, morality, narratives, and social change that comes from the digital disruption of social processes. Also, she is the lead research scientist of information warfare at the Army Cyber Institute. Let's give her a hand. On my left side, I do have Dr. Xiaozhong Liu, who's an associate professor of computer science at Worcester Polytechnic Institute, and his research interests include natural language processing, text and graph mining, informational retrieval, metadata, and computational social science. While he was active in academia, his research also extends to industry, and he was a senior consultant and NLP research director at Alibaba Demo Academy, and led numerous prestigious projects. Please give him a warm welcome. Okay, I'm trying to see where our other colleagues are, and I see that they're above. On the screen above me, you see Lee McIntyre, who is a research fellow at the Center of Philosophy and History of Science at Boston University, formerly executive director of the Institute for Quantitative Social Science at Harvard University. He served as a policy advisor to the executive dean and the Faculty of Arts and Sciences at Harvard. He is author of multiple books from MIT Press and makes very frequent media appearances. Hello, Lee. Thank you for being with us today.
Thanks very much.
Glad. Last but not least, we do have Asha Rangappa, who's a senior lecturer at Yale University and a former associate dean at Yale Law. Previously, Asha served as a special agent in the New York division of FBI, specializing in counterintelligence investigations. She has been a contributor on many television and radio outlets, and now is a legal and national security analyst. So again, I'm humbled by the presence of those specialists on our panel. And as I said in my a little bit chaotic introduction, is that we are looking at a very broad topic, and we would like actually to cover no less than 4 broad themes today within this topic. And those will concern the so-called post-truth reality, the second one being the arbiter of truth challenges, another facet of disinformation, the wonderful world of disinformation, is denialism. And last but not least, we would like to address a little bit about the large language models and the effects on disinformation today. So we'll try to cover from policy all the way to technical challenges. And without further ado, I would like to start, because I'm pretty sure that there will be a lot of questions from the audience as well, with an introductory question to all of the participants on this panel, and I'll start with asking probably Jessica on my right. Jessica, as we find ourselves in the so-called post-truth reality, what can we infer from the institutional reactions to disinformation spread, control, and mitigation of adverse effects in effectively polarized democratic societies such as the American ones?
So that's a really great question, and we are all what is standing between you all and lunch, so we'll all hopefully be very interesting and engaging. I think this question of institutional response is really interesting because the folks that are typically inside of institutions tend to be older, so they're not necessarily digital natives in where a lot of this disinformation is starting. When we look at the pandemic response as an example, the CDC said, "Well, talk to your doctor about your concerns about the vaccine." Well, that misses the fact that something like 70% of Americans don't have a primary care physician. They show up at the doctor's office and they see who's ever there, which doesn't exactly engender trust. So as we think about institutional responses, we have to get institutions to recognize the world as it is, not how they think it should be or how they hope it is. There's massive structures of social inequality that are really feeding into this disinformation space, and that's because a lot of the institutions aren't really in a lot of these spaces where we're seeing a lot of the impacts of this inequality.
Thank you very much. So they basically are missing, as big missing actor. I would like to ask the same question, if you can, address it, and as well, comment a little bit not only on the American case, but also globally. Are we looking at a very specific phenomenon that has been just outlined?
Sure, I would love to. Thank you. This is a really interesting question because, misinformation, disinformation do not only, it's a pattern of the United States, it's everywhere. If you compare somehow like Russia, China, American, and Europe, and you will find a disinformation, misinformation generation, and the diffusion can be in different models. But they share something maybe in common, which is misinformation is increasingly easier and popular being distributed on different kind of network. And especially when we have like AI and the social bubbles, AI, I think this foundation AI is make your bubble more comfortable to stay with. So that's the reason, no matter in American, like your case, it's like COVID-19. So if you're on the left or on the right, and you will find no matter which ideology you have, but you will find it's like the bubble reinforce your belief in the information exists in the bubble. So, and AI will make this diffusion more smooth and more efficient. So, which is a global challenge, not just belong to the United States. But somehow we want to pay attention, especially later tomorrow, going to compare misinformation diffusion generation between China and the US. And you will find that my basic idea is there is a way, no matter technology way or social way, there is a way to somehow control and remove the misinformation, but the cost can be really, really high. And our question is, do you really want to afford the cost of removing misinformation? Basically, my opinion is maybe not. Because when you totally remove and control misinformation, it means information censorship and free speech going to be challenged. It's very like Chinese case. And probably this is not something you want to happen in this country.
Thank you for addressing this. I would like to turn to and ask Asha on her introductory remarks precisely about that. And of course, afterwards, Lee, before we start looking at the nuances of those structural inequalities and some really, I think, provocative thoughts offered here by our panelists. Asha? Hello?
I can't believe I've been doing Zoom for like 3 years and still forget to unmute myself.
Oh, yes.
I think that there are 3 big challenges when it comes to institutional responses, and I'm assuming by institutional you mean government responses.
Yes.
The first is obviously our First Amendment. We have kind of, I think, a naive idea about information, and it's built into our jurisprudence, this idea of the marketplace of ideas. And we believe, our laws have evolved, our jurisprudence has evolved to, on the premise that the answer to bad ideas is just more ideas and better ideas. And somehow this is all going to compete in this marketplace, and the best ones will win out. And it doesn't take into account the new reality of the digital landscape, in which it's not a even playing field. Imagine a securities market where people have unfair advantage. This is our information space right now. But that's one challenge, is the First Amendment. The second is that our institutions have not been very good at observing the First Amendment. So I often say, the First Amendment and the FBI are 2 great tastes that don't go great together. And we've seen that in history. And as a result, we have a lot of buffers around speech and the government being able to intervene, both in terms of our use of propaganda, the exposure of our own population to information operations, and this really creates a problem in a globalized society. The third, I would say, is that this is an interdisciplinary problem, and our institutions are very siloed in their purpose and mission. And this is a problem that really spans a number of different areas. Is it the Department of Defense? Is it the Department of State? Is it the FBI and CIA? And meanwhile, our adversaries are really engaging in hybrid warfare, where they don't observe the same kinds of silos that we do. They don't observe the distinction between domestic and foreign and war and peace and private entities and public targets. And we just haven't gotten our mind around all of these different challenges when it comes to countering disinformation.
Thank you very much. Well, that is pretty sobering, and I hope it will also raise a lot of questions. And certainly, I'm looking for a very polemic second day as well. Lee, could you please offer your take on the institutional reactions and their adequacy?
Yeah, thank you for having me. There are a couple of things going on here. First, I think, in order to have an adequate response, you have to admit that we're actually in a disinformation war. I see a lot of people in government, I see a lot of people in journalism who refuse to draw the distinction between misinformation and disinformation. And you really have to face the fact that if what we're fighting is disinformation, that means it's intentional. That means that there's somebody behind it doing this on purpose, with a purpose. And, do we want to stop them? And if we want to stop them, we've got to understand that we're fighting with one hand behind our back. I mean, one of the attractions for, if you imagine disinformation coming from a foreign government, is that they want to launder it as quickly as possible through a domestic filter. Because then what happens, if they can get it through with social media or partisan media through a domestic filter, then our government has a little bit of trouble, don't they? Because then the minute that they try to fight it, then they're accused of partisanship. So, it hamstrings the media. They don't want to be biased. It hamstrings the government. They don't want to seem, like partisan. And so this is really a problem. I mean, as we speak here today, April 10th, Nina Jankowicz, who is the head of the DHS's Disinformation Governance Board, has been called before the subcommittee in the judiciary in the House to address the issue of weaponization of information and censorship of conservative voices. This is what is the problem, I think, in the government response to fighting disinformation. We have not figured out how to stop falling for the idea that in order to fight disinformation, we don't have to fight with one hand behind our back, because and I understand the importance of the First Amendment. But a lot of the talk about how, you cannot possibly preserve free speech and fight disinformation is itself disinformation. That is itself part of a strategic propaganda campaign where our adversaries are trying to exploit weaknesses. And one of them is that we don't want to seem partisan.
Thank you very much for those introductory answers. And of course, because we are here at LBJ School of Public Affairs, there will be questions, concerning policies. Two of them that are coming again, I would like to ask a round of comments. And it's something that we hear often from our students here, Dr. Dawson. What are the best strategies, and are there any best strategies and recipes for institutional engagement?
Yeah, I think we're still writing that playbook. I don't think we really have a good sense across different institutions of what the best strategies are. Sometimes the best option is ignore it because you don't want to create the Streisand effect. Sometimes the best strategy is you need to engage now, because if you let the silence stand, then someone else will fill the narrative for you. So I think we're still really trying to figure out what is something that's worth responding to, what is something that we should ignore, when do we start paying attention to things that happen on the fringe, when they start to move to the mainstream. How do you pay attention to what are the fringe narratives? How do we even define fringe, right? When I say fringe, I'm talking about from a network position, right? That's not in the centralized network position. And we tend to dismiss things that are hanging out on the fringe. Well, again, going back to the beginning of the pandemic, there has been a growing anti-vaccine movement in America, since the early 2000s with the Wakefield refuted study. Had we been paying attention to that inside of institutions, we would have recognized that this pandemic now is a perfect opportunity for this to grow and gain traction.
I agree.
And we just simply either didn't acknowledge or said, oh, that's just a bunch of crazy people, et cetera. And we didn't really engage with what the position was and how much confusion and chaos was going to come into this space because of the sort of modern historical unprecedents of this pandemic with the information environment.
Thank you. Very quickly, does empathy play a part in this process?
I mean, I think we have to understand where people are, right? And we have to, to do that, we have to understand, where are the new parents that are trying to figure out the best information for this, this child that they have, right? Looking at new parents. And, you go on Facebook, and I believe Frances Haugen talked about this, that, when you go on Facebook and you're looking for information, right, the government pages, the official pages, the vetted pages from, medical experts aren't the first thing that find you if you're, a new parent, right? The algorithm is pushing vaccine questions, vaccine hesitancy, all of these some folks that have legitimate concerns. There are people out there whose children have been harmed, right? Who did, deal with, a vaccine reaction, right? That's not the vast majority of it. But to say that it doesn't happen, doesn't play on it when it's your kid, right? So the problem at scale is not the same when it's your, issue.
Thank you for this comment, and there was a reason why I went back, and asked you, about. I believe you have a wonderful people coming out about structural inequalities, which and access, and I also myself always in my head I'm struggling, between this balance of empathy versus legitimization. However, I think we might come to, hopefully, to some sort of an agreement on our panel that ignoring probably is not the best strategy as far as we are, moving ahead. Now, Asha, can I ask you, is there a best strategy for engagement? Is there such a thing? Institutional.
Oh, wow. I don't know how to answer. That's a really big question. I would say that we are moving towards there are examples that suggest that we have some good approaches. So for example, and that, by the way, that leverage our strengths. We have to remember that disinformation by outside actors is an asymmetrical threat, right? There is a way that that these actors, China, Russia, are using things that we have traditionally considered our strengths, like our open society, as vulnerabilities to be exploited. And so the question is, how can we rechannel the things that are our strengths back the other way? One example that I thought was very good was the pre-bunking of narratives before the invasion of Ukraine. This was a way in which we leveraged our ability to gather intelligence, to share it with our allies, to leverage our soft power with Secretary of State Blinken going in front of the UN and putting out these narratives in advance so that they don't get traction, right? You essentially vaccinate the recipients by inoculating them against things that they are going to hear, and then they're more critical when they come. Another example that I think is good, though this has, to Lee's point, become politicized, but I think it was a good effort, was the attempted coordination in advance of the 2020 election between the FBI and social media platforms to be prepared for hack and dump operations, influence operations that might happen. This has gone down the whole road of the Twitter files. But this was, I think, getting an understanding of not looking at content. And I think we can, this might be for another question. We get really caught up in truth and veracity versus falsity. And to me, the more important thing is the source. Who is the actor? There can be true information that's put out, but if it's put out by an actor who's obscured, then that becomes a problem. And I think this is what that coordination was trying to get at. I don't know if we can call it a success or not, but I do think that there was at least evidence that we had learned from 2016 from Russia's hack and dump there, and we're trying to prevent that from happening again. And we actually had social media companies on board with that.
Thank you very much, Asha. And I do really appreciate the fact that you were giving positive examples, because often we are accused of being prophets of doom, right? Our research is always concerning, problems that, we can surely qualify as wicked problems. But I also agree with Asha that, and with the rest of the panelists, that we do have actually some good practices that we can share should we choose to do so. Dr. Liu, when should institutions disengage as opposed to engage? Now, we were talking about engagement, and I promised, to all the panelists and hopefully our students and guests here, that we're going to have the hard questions, in this panel. We're not going to spare, and thank you for being part of it.
I mean, this is an interesting question because I think right now when we say engage or disengage, is it like people, especially young people, young generation, consume information in a very different ways. So for instance, today, right here, I find that, a number of speakers and the panelists, and they give a really good, very insightful opinion about different topics. But when you ask young people, if you randomly pick someone, even from UT Austin campus, you bring him or her to the room and say, do you want to spend an hour listen and provide some feedback? And probably he or she's feedback is, I don't care. I'm more interested in 20-second videos from TikTok. Mm-hmm. When I'm talking to my student, maybe because I'm teaching information science and computer science, when I ask my student, do you know something like Trump is the bad guy or let's go Brandon? And they know, oh, we all know that. Yes, Trump is the bad guy and let's go Brandon. We all know that. This is very interesting. This is funny. But while I'm asking him or her, do you know the reason behind that? Why Trump is doing something bad or why Biden is doing something bad? Give me a comprehensive story. And the student probably say, I don't know. I don't care. Why I should know? 20 seconds videos can be more impressive. I know there's BBC colleague and a Voice of American colleague here, and you have a very good documentary, but young generations, they don't have interest, they don't have a patience to do that. So right now, I think when we talk about engage or disengage, so we should, investigate probably young generations, their attitude and their behavior when they consume information in the AI empowered time period. I'm especially interested, also tomorrow I'm going to want to talk about that. So when I'm studying, when I'm investigating young people from China, and when they come to the United States, they'll have a chance to access more comprehensive and true information. So for instance, a number of young people from China, so when they start studying in the United States after 2 or 3 years, they still believe that US lab generate the COVID-19 virus. And also they believe that we should essentially support Russia because if Russia losing the war, America will invade China next. So there's a number of facts that is missing. So but I'm more interested in why they keep this ideology, even though they have access for some more comprehensive information, but they purposely reject this accessibility to the true information. So I'm more interested in this behavior. So what's going on? So is there some social effort or tech efforts we should do to prevent this happening? So not just in American, but also in the global way. So this can be a very interesting but very challenging issue.
Well, thank you very much, because you've pointed out something which I believe is very important, about stepping on data, and that automatically will bring me back to Lee, to ask him probably the last of the series of the questions from this particular topic, which is really hard and broad. Lee, do we have evidence-based intervention and policies, as we already started talking about, and are they adequate for the challenge?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I want to celebrate the answer that Asha gave about pre-bunking, because there is a lot of evidence that this works. Right now, I'm part of a group called the CIRSE, the Cognitive Immunology Research Collaborative. It's based on this concept by philosopher Andy Norman. His book's called Mental Immunity. And we're trying to come up with an off-the-shelf program that institutions or individuals can use to inoculate themselves from bad information. So, if you think of disinformation, the pipeline, it starts with the creators, it goes to the amplifiers, and then to the believers. And it's often thought, well, there's nothing you can do about the creation of disinformation. Well, maybe that's true. Maybe you can't get Putin to stop being Putin. But if you could stop amplification, in its cradle, if before it has a chance to get out there. That's what really happened. Well, the example that Asha was talking about, Putin was about to launch some sort of a disinformation campaign about some fake atrocity that Ukraine was allegedly committing. And Biden just exposed it, in advance. They declassified some documents, exposed it. And so it never got any traction. Now he found another reason to invade. But, that's how you fight disinformation, I think, is the best is through amplification, stopping the amplification. But there is another way to fight it. And this I don't think should be overlooked. Before I got quite so interested in disinformation, let me put it this way. What brought me to the issue of disinformation was the issue of denial. Why people have denialism about vaccines or the shape of the earth or evolution or anything like that. And what I discovered was that a lot of it's based on disinformation. These sorts of beliefs about vaccines or the Jewish space laser and all this other stuff, they don't come out of nowhere. Those are propaganda. Those are things that someone wants us to believe. And here's the hard part. Once somebody believes that, it's very tough to get them not to, because facts are not going to change their mind. Denialism is not really about evidence. It's about trust. And so there is some very good empirical evidence which shows that you can debunk. So that's the pair, right? There's pre-bunking. Debunking also works, but you don't just debunk with facts. You debunk by talking about why people believe the things that they believe. What was the path that led them there? And it takes a lot of empathy and a lot of calm and a lot of patience. I went to a flat earth convention where I tried this, and I didn't get anybody to tear off the lanyard and say what a fool I've been. But I got them to listen. And the way I got them to listen was that I listened to them. So, demonstrating empathy, trust, that also, there's some empirical evidence behind that. So yes, there are studies. The best study on this is one by Cornelia Bache and Philip Schmid in Nature Human Behavior, June 2019, for the work on pre-bunking. You can find that in Andy's book, Mental Immunity, and in Sandra Vanderlin's brilliant new book, Foolproof, as well.
Thank you very much. Well, in general, I know that at least the zeitgeist amongst the skeptical research community like ourselves is that we should be striving for evidence-based policies as opposed to what ought to be, which was or how we think about certain things which might not reflect reality. But that brings me to the second broad topic, which I would like to start with Dr. Dawson and Asha. Who should be responsible for adjudicating the information veracity? The arbiter of truth, this perennial hot potato question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, if we look at how we've structured knowledge, right, with the advent of the printing press in the West, right, we had to restructure knowledge. Knowledge became out of control of the church now, and it became more democratized, right? And we had to develop institutional responses to that. When we looked at the yellow journalism, right, there were institutional responses to, what makes media, what is news, what are the journalistic ethics, et cetera. So as we think about, the arbiters of truth, quote unquote, we again need to look at where are the divisions and where are the breaks. The line in this country is not between red states and blue states, right? It's between blue cities, college towns, and everywhere else. That's a problem, right? Where are the network ties? Where are the ties to people that can, quote unquote, go back home and talk to, the people in their communities and still be heard because they don't speak the same language anymore. So when we look at the way that the educated elite have been pulling away from the rest of society in segregation in neighborhoods and colleges and the economy, that creates a problem of trust because I don't know you to talk to you about this anymore. I don't have the ability to reach out and have that conversation. So we have to really expand our ties, our relational ties back into a lot of these communities. And we're not going to get everyone, but this is a technical problem that is, exacerbating existing social problems. We're not going to tech our way out of this. We have to really look at the underlying issues and why people don't believe certain things. Mm-hmm. We look at, globalization and how it's been, quote unquote, good for the American economy. Well, good for who, right? Because I can show you towns in my state of Maine, where I'm from, that have have been devastated because the mills are not just shut down. They have been stripped for parts and are gone. And these were sources of jobs and community and pride and belonging that are gone now. So you can say
replaced by anger, right?
Well, it's replaced by what? Someone's going to go in and either replace that with hope or anger or despair, and who? Right? Yeah. And what is happening there? So we have to really look, like, these are hard problems. And to say that, I'm a college professor, you should trust me. Well, if you don't speak college, you're not going to trust me, right? So.
Thank you for pointing this one out. I think is really, really important. Sometimes I guess we should not be carried away in academia, like in the ivory tower, to have this common language with the wider segments of society. This is, in my mind, this is actually the mission of a public intellectual, right? To find those bridges instead of necessarily, have those ruptures. Asha, who should be responsible, for the arbiter of truth challenges?
Yeah, I think this is a great question, because what we've seen happen with the advent of social media is really, I wouldn't call it arbiters of truth, but the gatekeepers have been removed, particularly with journalism. We used to have gatekeepers that had certain journalistic practices. So there were some ideas that could never make their way into this sphere of debate or controversy. They could also create a sphere of consensus, which were things that we all agreed on. Now, in some ways, this was anti-democratic because there were certain things that never made their way in. Social media has allowed us to shine a spotlight on all kinds of inequalities, on police brutality. It allowed Arab Spring, all of these things, but it's also flattened authority to the point where everything can become up for debate. I think right now, the arbiters of truth have become the courts. What have we seen? We've seen defamation lawsuits against Alex Jones. We're seeing the Dominion lawsuit. And that's because they are gatekeepers. You cannot go into a court and lie. There are costs to that. We saw this with the election cases with the big lie. 60 of them were thrown out. But we can't rely on the courts to arbitrate everything. And I think to bring this back to Lee and Amanda's point, there is a concept in sociology about social trust. And that when social trust breaks down, what you end up with is cool trust. Meaning, if you can't count on norms of reciprocity for people to behave in honest and ethical ways, then you have to create formal rules and enforcement mechanisms in order to make everybody obey their rights and duties to each other. That's where we are now. That's why we're seeing all these defamation lawsuits, et cetera. How do we get back to this place of social trust? Empathy was mentioned before. I think we need to create this from the ground up. And Lee's point about, we can't stop disinformation. I tend to think of this as an analog to how we think of cybersecurity, right? In cybersecurity, you say you deter the bad actors, you defend against the bad actors. So you deter them by creating costs and consequences. You defend by creating patches or good systems, but then you also have to be resilient. In other words, you have to assume you're going to get hacked and that you have the capacity to bounce back. And we need to think of disinformation as a cognitive hack. Okay, these are hacks into our brain, and we need to deter the actors who are doing this. We need to create defenses, and then we also need to create resilience in terms of that mental immunity that Lee mentioned, and also social trust, where our fabric is not so easily divided by these narratives that become easy to believe.
Thank you very much, Asha, for this. But that will, necessarily bring me to, the next provocative question, being the devil's advocate, and I'll be asking Lee and Jessica, what are the limits, of this arbitration of truth? And in fact, should we even have, having in mind, the role that platforms and content moderation and how politicized that is, and in general, the clash with free speech, because yes, currently I agree that the courts are actually the filter and arbiters of truth. And you're absolutely correct. However, that goes back to the start of our conversation about this effective polarization. I'm not being heard, and now I feel that I'm being censored. Lee?
Yeah, the philosopher in me is going to come out here. Because it seems to me that one of the goals of disinformation is not just to get you to believe whatever particular falsehood they're trying to feed you. It's to try to polarize you against people who don't believe that falsehood, to see that person as an enemy. You distrust them. You might even hate them, right? And that's a terrible thing, because then you don't turn to the scientists for factual information, about science. You don't turn to the vaccinologists, et cetera. So where do you turn? Who is the arbiter of truth? Rather, the arbiter for what you should believe? It's the people you trust, the people in your community, maybe the people in your partisan community. And then we're in real trouble, because then here's the philosophical question: what is truth, right? And how do you know it? And how can you prove it? What's the evidence? Maybe the goal of disinformation, I think maybe we should think of it this way. Maybe the goal of disinformation is not to get you to believe a falsehood. Maybe it's to get you to question whether there is such a thing as truth. Because if they can get you to question whether there's such a thing as truth, then there's no such thing as accountability. Then there's no such thing as blame. I mean, isn't that what Putin does? Isn't that what I dare say Donald Trump does when they use whataboutism all the time? Well, what about this? What about that? What they're really saying is nobody knows what's true. You can't know what's true. And if you can't know what's true, you can't blame me for telling a falsehood. That's the really insidious thing I think about disinformation. It's not just straight up, this is false, but we want you to think it's true. It's those other people hate you and you should hate them. Because then we've got a much bigger problem than just what we believe.
Thank you. Would you like to address this one, or should we go forward?
What was the question again?
Oh, the question was, should we even have arbitration of truth? Having in mind how much, this concept is loaded politically and, is divisive.
So I'm going to take a step beyond the content and move down to the data. The problem that we're seeing right now is not that, we've got Nazis on the internet violating Goodwin's law, first claim of it today, but like Nazis have been on the internet literally since it started, right? One of the first forums was LibertyNet, right? And it was a neo-Nazi forum. That is not the issue. The issue now is the algorithms that are collecting data on all of us and then pushing content, as Dr. Liu pointed out, to enhance our filter bubbles. They know how to push the content to you that's going to confirm your biases. It's going to make you angry. It's going to make you click, like, and share. And that keeps you on platforms so that the advertisers on the platform can make more, or so that the platforms can make more money from advertisers. So we've always had these problems, right? We've always had, there's been about, a third of the population, believes in at least one conspiracy theory. The problem now is that the platforms have enabled the activation of this group, and now they're engaged in, I can't remember where I saw this quote, but someone basically said the folks that are on the couch that do politics as a hobby, we don't actually want them involved in politics, right? And I don't remember where that's from, but like that's sort of the issue now, is we have folks that are not necessarily engaged because this is, they want to do good work for the good of the community. They want money, power, or influence. And so the platforms are really a key part of the problem here, right? Leave the Nazi content up. People want to go find it, and we don't incur the major costs of taking things down, because I think Dr. Liu is right that there's a major cost when we start really taking down stuff, because they're like, with the exception of like the lizard people, most of these conspiracy theories that are out there has like a grain of truth in it. So how do we get to addressing the concerns in the grain of truth without legitimizing and amplifying the broader BS that's around it, that's to sell, testosterone pills or something?
Yeah, at the end, monetize and so on. Dr. Liu, moderation to what extent? Arbitration to what extent?
We may want to pay a little bit attention. So I want to recall your memory a bit back to 2020. So after president election, when Twitter blocked a number of information. So when Twitter do that in somehow aggressive way, and the popularity of some other social media like Parler and Truth Social popularity goes up. So I would like to provide you this technical challenge and social challenge that when we talk about accountability, so when a specific platform control kind of information, so the other platform will take advantage of that. So this will increase. This will be increasingly challenging. So if, like, let's say, Truth Social become increasingly popular in the United States, and then something, I mean, it will challenge. It will definitely challenge the battle. I mean, the control of misinformation. So this will not. I mean, so if Twitter do something aggressive, it will not just help to remove disinformation. Instead, it may do that in a different way, contribute in very different way. So also, I want to pay attention when we talk about accountability. So also. Some other countries, so once again, have to use the example from China. So like China, they provide a very successful strategy. I have to say that is they use a real name system to control, they call that misinformation. So for instance, if I want to release any information, even I click like or share, so I have to first register with my real name and real ID. So which means very, very super strong accountability. So if I do something that maybe, government don't like, so people may have trouble. So tomorrow I'm going to share some case that if someone release some information and the government believe this is misinformation, so he or she will not just lose this account, but all the accounts on the social media. Okay, so which is a very effective way to control misinformation. But I would like to raise the question. So this cause is huge. It fundamentally challenges your free speech, right? It's because of information censorship. So should that happen in this country? So we need to pay attention to that. So we need to always pay attention to the cause. So when we moderate this kind of info, no one really likes misinformation. But when we do that, we need to do that in a very, very cautious way. And we need to, before we do anything, make anything aggressively, we need to think about is the bad consequences may trigger from such thing.
If I could build on that real quick, I think you bring up a really, really, really critical, important point. Hannah Arendt talked about this in The Origins of Totalitarianism, where she talked about atomized individuals. And essentially, when you are, when the consequences are for you, the individual, right, it makes it that much harder to come together and engage in collective action. And what the networks are doing now, right, is we are now all identified, we're traceable, everything that we're doing. One of the previous presenters talked about, like, this is all now visible and now manipulatable and trackable. We're in the process of creating this hyper-atomized, society in a lot of ways. And what are the consequences as we think about that for collective action to do this messy thing called democracy?
Thank you for this, both. And I think those are really important topics which we all should be thinking about very carefully. I know that opinions, when it comes to disinformation, all of us as scientists, as public figures, but also as daily citizens, we have strong opinions because it matters. However, rash sort of decisions might not necessarily, bring us to, universities can probably provide, the technical means, suggestions of how to get rid of all disinformation, and we'll be very curious, but the cost might be unbearable socially. Our next sort of broad topic that we would like to touch upon, is something connected with Lee's work, for a very long time. And I would like to ask him, and then of course all of our participants to comment if they want. What are the most significant impacts of denialism in the so-called disinformation disorder? Lee, would you share with us, because I thought that some of the things that I read are fascinating from your scientific observations on denialism.
Yeah, mention one, and I'll expand on it. Which was your favorite?
Well, how about flat Earth?
So you picked the hardest one. I would have avoided that one, and for the following reason. If you tell me any... So the thing to understand about denialism is that science deniers tend not to deny all science. They tend to be selective. I call them cafeteria deniers, right? They go through the cafeteria line and I'll take a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And so you have denialism about vaccines, about climate, about evolution. And for all of those, I can tell you who has an interest in building an army of deniers. And those are the people who are making the disinformation, right? We know the story about, everybody knows the story about how, there are allegedly microchips in the COVID vaccines. But how many people know that that was the result of a disinformation campaign from a Russian troll farm? This was in the Wall Street Journal. It was a one-day story that never got picked up on cable TV. But so you might have asked, who could possibly, why would that be in their interest? It's because they had a competing vaccine called the Sputnik. It's because there was great economic incentive to have the Sputnik vaccine be the one that was the first to market in Asia and in Africa. So, for any science denial that you can name, I can pretty much name you who's got an interest at stake, whether it's economic or political or ideological. The one that I have never figured out is flat Earth. Nobody is making a buck on this that I can see. I mean, they do have a swag fair, but a couple of T-shirts and a hat, that's maybe going to get them to the next convention. And what is the disinformation campaign behind it, if there is one? Whose interest does that serve ideologically or in terms of their power? There is a strong evangelical element demographically behind the flat earthers that I met. Yet when you ask them why they believed it, they would not talk about their faith. Faith was not why they believed it. They said it was based on evidence. Now, as a philosopher, that opened up a whole new channel for me to then talk about, why, let's talk about what your evidence is and why you believe it. I mean, I'm a philosopher of science, so I was comfortable with that. But the idea that there was some nefarious force that was creating propaganda to get them to believe it, I never figured that one out. There is a terrific book coming out soon by someone from Texas named Ashley Landrum. She was at the same Flat Earth convention I was, though we didn't know one another because we were both incognito. And she's written a whole book on this that, to my knowledge, is not out yet. I think she's at Texas Tech. She might be at University of Texas. I can't remember anymore. It's been a while. But the book is coming out. And if you'd like to read, maybe she solved that. I never did.
Thank you very much for this. And before I go to Asha, I had a reaction here from Jessica. Jessica, please.
So the microchip is a really interesting cultural phenomenon in a lot of ways. So one of the things that is a truism in sociology is beliefs that are real in their content are real in their consequences. And if you look at evangelical beliefs about the mark of the beast, right, that you will not be able to buy or sell without having this, basically what has been interpreted in a modern era as a chip, right? Mm-hmm. So that propaganda took a very specific form because it would map into an existing cultural belief. And there's a lot of fear around that, right? Doesn't matter if it's true or not. The belief in itself makes that your actions are going to now, follow from that. Right. So I think that, when we look at the content of these propaganda campaigns and disinformation campaigns, right, they're going to take specific cultural forms here. They're going to take different cultural forms in China. They're going to take different cultural forms in India. So you have to understand, right, it's not just what is flowing on the network, but why is it going into which spaces? Okay. And I think that's a really, really critical piece that we have to pay attention to, especially when we look at things about, the vaccine and the microchip, right? It mapped onto a very large portion of people's fears about the New World Order, et cetera.
Pre-existing already foundation.
Can I just comment, Jess, you don't know how correct you are because the article in the Oriental Review said that the reason there were microchips in the vaccine is because the patent on that was held by Bill Gates and that the patent was number 666.
Of course it was.
Okay.
Of course it was.
Thank you for this. Asha, thank you for your patience. I would like to hear your opinion and Dr. Liu's, on denialism before we move to the large language models.
Yes, I think that with denialism, and this intersects with polarization and the tribalism that Lee mentioned earlier. There's a great paper called The Nature and Origins of Misperceptions, which talks about which investigates directional motivated reasoning and why people believe things and are impervious to changing their minds. And it was testing whether people are motivated by accuracy or by loyalty to their membership in a tribe. And I think we need to understand that as we get more polarized, people are not believing things because of its accuracy. That's not their motivating principle. They are believing things to signal to others that they are a member of that group. This is something that Donald Trump has channeled very, very effectively, that he primes people for loyalty to him. And so when people believe the things that he says or they ignore the things that he wants them to ignore, it's not because that might actually be aligned with their true convictions, but it's because they want to show their loyalty to him. And this is sort of the path down authoritarianism, right? So I think, there's a question of how do we prime people for accuracy so that becomes the motivating principle. There is some research from that paper that I just mentioned that elites within the tribe can actually give permission for people to disengage from beliefs. Of course, this is very threatening. So you saw, for example, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger get thrown out of the tribe when they try to give permission. But if you get a critical mass of those people, you do give people a safe way to an off-ramp, if you will. So I think that's one thing. I think that the algorithms that Jess mentioned earlier are just so important because they do allow to reinforce these tribal divisions and in particular to create an asymmetrical media environment. One thing that is really interesting about the right-wing media ecosystem, this was a study done in a book called Network Propaganda by Yochai Benkler and a couple of other authors whose names I can't remember off the top of my head, but they showed that the right-wing media ecosystem does not overlap with traditional media. It's kind of insulated. And so it's impervious to things coming in from the outside, and it's giving, partisan, I forget the term that they use, but basically identity confirming narratives, such that when they're challenged, this is what we see from the Dominion lawsuit. When those identity confirming narratives are challenged, they're not like, oh, I'm believing things that aren't true. They move to other outlets that will give them those same identity confirming outlets. So they go to OANN, they go to Newsmax, because they don't have the self-policing that even left-leaning but traditional media does. All of these things intersect, and it's really hard to disentangle them. But I do think that the role of both partisan loyalty and tribalism, the ability of algorithms to really micro-target into those, and the asymmetry between these are all playing a role in the denialism.
Thank you very much, Asha. As promised, Dr. Liu, any takes on denialism before we move? Because I will start with you on the large language models.
I can just give a very quick, very short story. I remember when we talked about denialism, my 6-year daughter, one day she came back home and told me that, hey, Daddy, do you know Donald Trump is a bad guy? And I say, oh, you're 6-year-old. Okay, why he's a bad guy? And she said, because my teacher told me that. And I asked her, so do you have any evidence to show that? And my daughter think again, and later she said, because Donald Trump only like boys, she don't like girls. All right, and I feel quite frustrated. And then in the next few days, I asked her to search in Google and tell me 3 things Donald Trump did, 3 bad things and 3 good things that Donald Trump made. So I think the basic thing here in this country, I think if we want to totally, I won't say totally solve the problem, but make the problem a little bit better is education, especially for the young people. So we need to educate them critical thinking. I know this is once again, later we're going to talk about language model and AI. This can be increasingly hard and for young people and even junior people to appreciate this comprehensive access of information. This is increasingly hard, but something we have to be done if we want our future to be better. Education going to be essential, going to be foundation. I really worry about that.
Thank you very much. And again, I'd like to thank all of you, for, going through all those. I promised I didn't going to spare you hard questions. And then we'll reverse the order, and I'll come back to you, and I'll ask you, how will the exponential development of AI capabilities affect the disinformation volume, spread, and reach? Having in mind that the whole hype right now is about ChatGPT 3, 4, etc.
Thank you. I think this is, once again, this is a very, very essential question because it will change our life in the future years, especially for the young people. I think one thing is that you know that, so something AI technology like ChatGPT, essentially when we adopt that in a commercial way, and commercially, they just want to maximize their income right? So for instance, if you find some people have a chance of overweight and it will keep recommending you soft drink and Coca-Cola to drink, okay, to get more money, get more income from you. So I think ChatGPT or AI technology in future going to be adopted in the same way. Once again, they will, in American, you know that we have a filter bubbles, and which trigger a very strong political and social polarization. So AI's power in the future is to make your bubble more comfortable to stay, and you don't want to step out in the future. This is unfortunately, this is part of my research. I've been working at both Chinese and American very big tech companies, and part of my job is recommendation system. So I know how it works. So this is a very click driven. If we somehow find that you click something, we will keep recommend you things. But right now, AS, instead of recommend you something, we will generate something for you, which will reinforce your belief in certain concept or ideology. And you know, when ChatGPT comes out, one thing is like some other government like China, what they do is they block access for ChatGPT, so no one allowed to use ChatGPT in China. Mm-hmm. But they do that in very, very quick way. So they develop their own GPT functions, so national ones. So to train the ChatGPT to acknowledge a new kind of ideology. So I believe in the future, unfortunately, misinformation generation, diffusion going to be more aggressive. It's going to be increasingly challenging to battle with misinformation, disinformation because of AI technologies. But something we have to do. And I think most people here, audience, have a very strong social background. So I will appreciate if you somehow collaborate with computer science people and collaborate with the technical companies. And we need to, no one can figure out a solution by a group of people individually. Yeah. So we need to do that in a creative way.
This is why I would like to ask Dr. Dawson here from sociological point of view. Are we going for a tech paradise or tech nightmare, with all of this instrumentation that Dr. Liu is talking about from your perspective?
I think if you look at how China has leveraged AI and machine learning in society, it's benefited some groups very, very much, and they think it's great. And then it's also not benefited other groups, and we're working on a slow genocide in a lot of ways. So I don't think it's going to be either or. I think the biggest concern that I have is twofold. In the short term, the disinformation problem is going to get exponentially worse. The average American is functionally literate at like the 9th grade level, right? They don't have deep knowledge about things. So if it feels true and it's close enough, right, it's going to probably be, so we're going to see in the short term really, really rapid diffusion of a lot of really bad actors, leveraging this system. We've already seen this being leveraged in revenge porn and fake revenge porn that's been generated by AI, right? Putting your face on something else. We saw this years ago with Gamergate, where they were going after, people's kids, putting their kids' faces on, snuff films. So in the near term, I think we're going to see a lot of legal challenges. What does this legal environment look like? We don't know. Are these large language models, engaging in fair use to develop their content? I think one of the problems right now is, I think, ChatGPT and they've basically gathered everything that's on the internet. Well, there's a lot of garbage on the internet, right? That's everything from like political speeches to porn to Nazis, across the board. And they've dumped it all in the same trash can and stirred, right? So you get, a lot of garbage out of these. I put my prompts for my social inequality class in there, and they were garbage answers. They were well written, but they were garbage. They were completely wrong. So we're going to see folks, if you can figure out how to leverage this in domain-specific knowledge, I think they'll have better results in the short term, because, basically, we have libraries that are categorized, and we have the Dewey Decimal System and others that help us categorize knowledge systematically. I don't know how the models have been built in the AI that categorizes this stuff and says, well, this is valid, this is not, et cetera. So I think in the short term, we're going to have a lot more problems. It's going to be used by a lot of bad actors. People are going to get really hurt by this. The jurisprudence has to come out on this to leverage, holding people responsible. Who do we hold responsible for this? There's lots of questions right now in the legal framework of, subscriptions and self-driving cars and all. Who's responsible when something goes wrong? Mm-hmm. That hasn't been played out yet. So this is bigger than just the large language models. Mm-hmm. I think some companies that are going to be able to leverage this, again, on domain specific will probably be useful. But the other piece to this is that these things can't create. they can't fill in the gaps, right? So when we look at, there's this really fantastic book, Invisible Women, Data Bias in a World Designed for Men. And it talks about all of the taken for granted assumptions that go into the data. And the data generation, and what we capture and what we use and what we measure, and the gaps. Well, until we can develop machines that can identify the gaps and help us fill in the blanks there, we're going to continue to just replicate existing biases and existing inequalities. So it will benefit some. It will absolutely exacerbate existing harms more, I think, too.
Thank you. Sobering. I would like to ask Asha and Lee if they want to, tell us their opinion on the projection near versus, far future with this AI capabilities, not from technical perspective, but from social, philosophical, law enforcement. Asha?
Yes. I focus on Russian disinformation, and what I see mostly with AI is the ability for China to really catch up in a way that, that the flaws that their disinformation may have in terms of language or not being able to mimic, the societies that they want to, in the same way that Russia has perfected since the Cold War, will allow them to catch up and will become a bigger problem. And I think, really, this is just another level of the problem we're already dealing with. And we're going to have to find ways to create more friction in terms of, its amplification and spread, because of the things that we've talked about, that once people become exposed to it, it's very hard to undo it. And, to me, this comes back to the concept I started out with, which is the marketplace of ideas, and that, how do we create a digital marketplace, an informational marketplace that most closely resembles a real town square. And I think that's what we had when we focus on content moderation and all of these, we're kind of looking at the wrong paradigm. The question is, how do we allow ideas to compete? Because to Jess's point, if they were all competing on equal footing, I don't think flat earth or Nazis would have the biggest crowds around them. If you went to the New Haven Green, I really don't think that that's where people would be crowded around. They would be crowded on much more interesting and exciting ideas. The other thing that I will say is, I think the direction that, maybe this is me as a lawyer speaking, I think that when all else fails, go to lawsuits, and looking at the harm that these technologies create on society. And I think the big tobacco model is a really good one, because what they went for is not trying to regulate the product or trying to ban it. They looked at the harm that it was creating, and how the companies were participating in deceptive practices, creating addictions and all of these. And I think that maybe, we can look at it from that point of view. There's like 41 attorneys general who've already issued letters to the social media companies about the effect on teens, et cetera. I know this is moving away from AI, but I think that this is just going to exacerbate the existing harms. And I'm really looking at how we might be able to look at this differently or utilize our tools that we have to start creating more regulation around them.
Thank you, Asha. And it seems that we're converging here on a consensus. Lee, a very last sentence, and I know I have to apologize to everyone, because we promised open questions, but we'll collect them because I don't want this panel to end. I have too many questions. Lee, this is the ultimate word, and of course, please come and listen to those very engaging speakers tomorrow again. Lee, it's going to get worse. It's going to get better. Optimist, pessimist.
I have to say, ChatGPT scares the hell out of me, because the first thing that I put in was the hardest philosophical question that I know. And it gave me an answer that I would have been proud to put my name on. And then I asked it to write an acrostic poem about mandarin oranges in a pirate voice, thinking, you can't do it. First sentence of that was, mighty fine citrus these mandarin oranges be. And it just got better and better after that. This is scary stuff. So the problem is just, raised it is, what happens when bad actors get a hold of this? Well, bad actors have always been in the information sphere, and deepfakes, I don't have any solution to that. But I want to think, maybe the closing thought here I want to leave us with is Wikipedia. Wikipedia faced this problem of everything got dumped in a pile and then you stir. And for a while, people made fun of Wikipedia because it was kind of a cesspool, not on certain topics, not on philosophical topics, which look at ChatGPT. Maybe that's why I got a good answer, because who's going to put in disinformation about philosophy, right? But Wikipedia was really bad about certain things, but it's not anymore. And why isn't it? I don't know if you've looked at Wikipedia lately, but it is almost a model for the internet. It is really good. What happened with Wikipedia? The people who cared about it decided we've got too valuable a thing here to just let the wreckers take over. And so they started to vet it. There had to be certain things, certain steps you had to go through. But here's I want to make sure everybody understands. Anybody can still change a Wikipedia page. It's just that now the response is like lightning, okay? Used to be that you could put up disinformation, it would sit there for a week. Now, it's not that they've got moderators that won't let you change the Wikipedia page. You can change it and put in your disinformation, but that disinformation is only there for 2 seconds before one of the moderators catches it. Maybe that's what's going to happen with ChatGPT. It's and Asha, you're absolutely right. It's not open it all up to everybody and we'll solve the problem, because I don't think that good ideas drive out bad necessarily. But if we have enough people who care, and we figure out some technological way, maybe Xiao, this is your question, right? What is the appropriate lightning fast speed response to ChatGPT that allows it not to get put in the hands of the disinformers so that it just wrecks us like deep fakes?
Thank you very much. And I would like to ask all of you to applaud our fantastic speakers today. Thank you.